Pivotal game.
I accidentally wore my
Every
cream
time
too.
I'd say, yeah, I'd be cool to chat with her, but
I didn't have anything clean though.
We can't be consistent with.
Good evening. Call to order, my light. Call to order Subcommittee on Finance and Property and Committee of the Whole on this Monday, June 13th, to resume our budget hearings. This evening, we will be hearing from Mayor Cahill, who will be coming around 7 o'clock. And then otherwise, we will work him in when he shows up, but we will start with, first with Mark Foster, not here.
Solicitor would like to go first, Mr. Chairman, if possible.
If
Mr. Foster isn't here.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll also be hearing from our Animal Patrol Officer, Matt Lipinski. Brian Ailes will be speaking to the Harbor Master's budget. And we also have Chief Peter O'Connor and Chief John Lasher speaking as well. So if we want, we can start with Solicitor Williams and go directly to her budget on page 34 this evening. Good evening, Ms. Williams.
Good evening, Councilor Houseman and members of the council. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about the Solicitor's Office budget. I can't believe that it's that time of year again. It feels like we just did FY22 and FY21, and anyway, the years go on and on. So many of you have heard me sort of go through this before, but I always think it's worth reviewing. The Solicitor's Office is in charge of providing legal guidance and advice and opinions to all city officials, including the mayor's office, the city council, boards and commissions, department heads. There are 30 departments. There are 42 boards and commissions. There are over 300 city employees, and there are 9 labor unions that the city has and that we engage in collective bargaining with. Well, every 3 years, but sometimes, it takes a little bit of time to get those contracts wrapped up. So our core functions are just the day-to-day stuff that keeps everything going, which are advising on conflict of interest laws, public records laws, open meeting law, procurement law, reviewing contracts. We reviewed 180 contracts through the beginning of June this year. We review claims that come in against the city pertaining to property damage. Currently, we have 15 different matters in litigation that are relatively active. We're responsible for all land disposition and conveyance issues, so drafting and reviewing leases, deeds, easements, licenses, things of that nature, assisting with drafting ordinances. I know this year and over the years we've worked with many of you who have come forward with initiatives. I think recent ones that come to mind are the bike lane ordinance and the sidewalk shoveling ordinance from Councilor Rotundo, Councilor Feldman. We're working on a naming ordinance and most recently a parking ordinance. As far as litigation goes, our responsibility is to prosecute and defend all claims. Those can be sometimes quite substantive and time-consuming. Other times they can be more sort of mundane, such as vital records cases where an individual is seeking to change the name on a birth certificate. Sometimes in those cases we have insurance coverage. So in that case, the insurance company hires outside defense counsel. We remain involved, but the insurance company basically directs the defense. We do, from time to time, hire outside counsel to handle litigation. If it is a large piece of litigation and it gets to the point where the law department is essentially spending full time litigating a case, that's really not in the best interest of the city because then we're precluded from doing the other work that we need to do. However, there are many cases that we do handle in-house. typically along the lines of this, land use cases. We have, as I said, 9 city unions. This year, I am happy to report that 7 of the 9 unions have all settled contracts. And I will give kudos to not only the unions that worked with us, but to Assistant Solicitor Jesse Dole, who over the years has grown into the role of handling the lion's share of the labor negotiations, which has allowed us to reduce our reliance on outside counsel for that purpose. So we still have 2 more to go. As you know, we attend council meetings and legal affairs. We also, from time to time, are required to attend ZBA meetings, planning board meetings, Concom meetings, airport commission meetings, things of that nature to assist and advise. So all of this is just in the normal course of our day-to-day job without any major issue or unexpected issue arising, without major litigation, without a pandemic, or without a controversial project such as the grid grant of location, which I know has taken up a lot of everybody's time and energy and concern. This year, we participated in assisting with the charter review process, which I will say, as time-consuming as it was, I think it was a great process. And I think that the committee worked very, very hard, and it was really a good exercise, I think, for me and for other people in the law department to go through that. We're not quite there yet, but we're obviously very close. I know on the heels of that, once that's done, we're going to be doing ordinance review. And the other big thing we know we have coming up this year is there's going to be the construction along Bridge Street, and the city is going to be required to take 150 easements by eminent domain, and that is a very time-consuming process. You all have, or the council, different forms of it has been through that before, so we have a template for it, but nevertheless, it is very time-consuming, and Assistant Solicitor Dole will be running point on that project. So I think that is the best sort of overview I can give. It's really difficult to summarize every single thing that we do and go through the breadth of the different topics that we deal with, because there are many, and some are very small but very important to the individual asking the question, and some are very large. And no matter what, we sort of have to go through the same process, which is to try to gather all the relevant facts and figure out what local, state, and or federal ordinance or regulation might apply, and then do an analysis and then try to provide a meaningful response. This year, you'll see in the assistant solicitor line that I believe there's an increase, because last November, when one of the former assistant solicitors left, we added 10 hours to that position. So that is why you see an increase in that line. That decision, you may recall, was made really to allow us to try to maintain the pace with just the core function of our work, and didn't really think that that would allow us to reduce our outside counsel or litigation budget. Those numbers are essentially, litigation number is lower this year because last year we really bumped it up because of a major piece of litigation. So it's reverted to the $135,000 that it was in FY19 and FY20. I think FY21 we actually went down. One of the years we went down to 130, really just to try to help out with filling some gaps in the budget. So, it's really, as far as the numbers go, the same amount of money, and, while at the same time attorneys' rates increase. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Solicitor Williams. Members of Finance and Property?
Yeah, I would just have a comment. I just want to thank you, Solicitor Williams. I think your office does a great job utilizing the funds that you get and just the complexity of the variation of what you work on. And both assistant solicitors, Jesse Dole and Bethel Mix, have been very responsive and helpful to me. And dealing with constituent, I think most of them have been land use type issues, but it's very helpful. So, you know, I'm good on questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. President Flowers?
I am similarly good on questions and agree with Councilor St. Hilaire about my gratitude for the office.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is on the Assistant City Solicitor lines. Are both Assistant Solicitors full-time, or is one full-time and one part-time?
No, they're both full-time. As of November of last year, they're both full-time.
Okay. And my second question is the last line on page 34, the litigation line. It includes costs associated with legal services and expenses and settlements, and I wonder if you could provide a breakdown or a breakout of the settlements issue. Is this a sort of a set-aside prospectively for what might happen?
So there have been years where we've dipped into that to pay a settlement. To my memory is we did that one year when we had the litigation with the Sheriff's Department. Typically, it's very rare that we end up in a situation where we're paying anything. So it's definitely available as needed, but I'm hard-pressed to think of a time that it was used for settlements other than that time. And I think that we came to the council for that. But it's not something we do in the normal course of business.
Okay. And to distinguish that from the line above it, which is outside counsel, the outside legal service, could you distinguish between the outside legal services piece of the litigation line and the outside counsel line itself?
Yeah. So litigation is a subset of outside counsel, you know, and it's just a more particularized use of the funding that we like to break out and keep track of. And, you know, historically, ever since I've been here, that's what the two lines have been. So obviously litigation, we know what litigation is. Outside counsel tends to be more along the lines of a specialized issue or project. For example, Mr. Miares is advising the council on the grid petition. He has specialized knowledge and experience in that area, and that's a perfect example of something we didn't anticipate needing this year, and that account is being used to pay his legal fees. In many years, not so much anymore because of the work Assistant Solicitor Dole is doing. We have relied on that for some of the collective bargaining that we've done, particularly with the public safety unions. So anything that's not litigation that requires a specialized attorney would be paid from the outside counsel budget.
Okay, so if setting settlements aside, those two lines are somewhat interchangeable then?
Well, I would say litigation is a subset of outside counsel.
Okay.
And if I were ever to, I try to be very careful about charging to the correct line in order so that we can all keep track of really what is the expense of litigation versus outside counsel. But we have had years where we've done interdepartmental transfers between those two lines.
All right, thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you. Other counselors? Questions? Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question, this may be a question for Mr. Ailes, but building off of the piece about interdepartmental transfers, in your time as city solicitor, Ms. Williams, has the department ever had to go outside of an interdepartmental transfer to cover litigation or settlement expenses in the event that there's one particular issue?
Beyond intra-departmental transfers?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that maybe one year we came back to the council many years ago for an additional transfer from another department. I want to say it might have been early on, 2014, 2015, but I don't think we've had to do it recently. Obviously, the record, you know, The records will show
Okay.
whether that was the case, but I don't remember recently having to do it.
Okay, that's helpful context, thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions from the council, so thank you very much, Solicitor Williams. Appreciate seeing you, and look forward to another productive year with the
Yeah.
council.
Well, you're welcome, and go Celtics. I hope Jason Tatum has a good game.
Next up, Matt Lipinski from Animal Control Office. That is on page 50. Good evening,
Good
Matt.
evening. It's nice to be back in person again, is it not?
Yes, it is.
All right. So this evening, I've provided you with a packet this evening. I just wanted to take a moment and go through my department day-to-day kind of duties, responsibilities. A lot of you may know already, but I know there's some of you who are newer. So I just wanted to take a moment, if I may. So there's two sides to our department. There's law enforcement and then there's animal health. Law enforcement takes up a big piece of things. When I look at the code enforcement section of it, that's where we're, on patrol, we're out in the city. We have, believe it or not, 57 different patrol spots throughout the city that we try and show presence in. That being said, I broke them down on the next page by ward, just to give you an idea. What we try is, we have two full-time employees, myself and Officer Callahan. Between the two of us, we try and patrol at least one ward per day, if not two. That's the most targeted approach we do. On top of that, we obviously patrol high traffic areas as well, such as Lynch Park, Dane Street Beach, for example. Aubert Park, the larger parks and open spaces in each ward is what I consider high traffic. So that's a lot. We're looking for, obviously, leash law compliance. At the same time, we have the park beach seasonal restrictions that change when the summer comes around. And I'm happy to answer any questions on those. I know I already had some. While we're on that, obviously, we look at warnings or citations, verbal warnings, written warnings, monetary citations when necessary. The approach we take with that is education. Educational enforcement goes a lot further, in my opinion. It works very well for not only the city and the residents, but it also goes a lot further and does a lot for the department in terms of getting out, educating the public. When we look at the calls for service, as you can see, there's a lot of different calls for service. I'm on page 4 of my document now. A lot of different, you have incidents, complaints, obviously stray animals, and then wildlife calls. Wildlife calls have been through the roof lately. Biggest reason I think for that is when the pandemic hit, a lot of people stayed inside. They didn't go out as much, allowed wildlife to encroach. And now we're seeing some conflicts. What do I mean by conflicts? Not so much bites or negative interactions, but a lot of orphaned animals, nuisances come up a lot. Complaints, improper disposal of animal waste, unrestrained dogs, all the way to well-being checks, animal cruelty and neglect. We do handle those cases, thankfully not a lot. We also respond to reports of house fires in case there's any animals inside that are in need of service. Any police interactions where there's an arrest or a hospitalization and there's an animal involved, we have to respond to that. As well as emergencies, animals hit by motor vehicles, animals left unattended in warm vehicles. I had one of those today. That being said, just a few statistics that I wanted to point out on the next page for you. We do have two full-time employees, myself and Officer Callahan, as I said before. She was increased to full-time, I believe it was October or November of 2019. As you'll see, annual average calls for service since I have been here, which is July 2014, is on average 907 calls that we handle annually. Highest year, we had over 1,000. That's a lot. I know the next statistic says we answer 91.5% of those calls. The reason that there's a gap and it's not 100% is because it's times that we're not on duty. There's only 2 of us. Those calls are answered by the police department, and then we later are charged with following up on those later. But in terms of initial response, that's why that number is 91.5%. Average total citations issued is 91. As I show, highest year in 2015, we issued 195 citations. Again, majority of those at any given time are warnings. Normally written, but there is obviously the exception for fines. Since COVID, we're down to about 60 on average per calendar year. Reason being for that, when the pandemic happened, to put it simply, we were trying to limit officer interaction as much as possible. Because a 2-person department, we were trying to stay healthy and stay on the street. Unfortunately, if one of us goes down, it severely handicaps the department. So that's why that's down. And we impound 60 animals on average annually. That's anything from dogs and cats to wildlife. For a majority of different reasons. It could be a loose animal, could be an animal in need of medical attention or euthanasia. On the next page, last tier of law enforcement is public education. I'm sure if any of you follow the Facebook page, we're constantly blasting out educational information. Whether it be lost and found animals, weather advisories, animal health advisories, such as avian flu, etc., and various other animal-related educational material. We have had a public workshop in the past, Living with Coyotes. That was a few years ago at this point. I had hoped to have more, and then the pandemic came around. So we're going to look to get that up and going again. We do an internship with the high school students, senior internship, that we participate with the police department. And then I'm also looking at incorporating a responsible pet ownership series, which I look to partner with a dog trainer and try and just go over the fundamentals of, whether it be dog training, bite aversion, proper animal ownership. And then the last section is animal health. The animal health section, it's a big section. I know it fits on one page, but it is a big section. It's a big part of our job. We have animal inspections. We have approximately 40 active keeping of animal permits, which is primarily chickens, but livestock in general, chickens, horses. Those are issued by the health department, but all the inspections, initial inspections are performed by my department. Follow-up inspections are performed every fall by my department. Also, kennel inspections. We have 7 active dog kennels in town that have permits to operate. The rabies program, any bites or rabies exposures, could be from dogs, could be from wildlife, could be animal to animal, could be human to animal. We have to follow those up with quarantine periods set by the state. It's either 10, 45, or 4 months. That's 10 days, 45 days, or 4 months. There's quite a bit of that we deal with. Anytime that we have an incident, whether it be a bite incident, it's followed by a quarantine. So there's a lot that stems off every little piece. And then we offer a rabies vaccine clinic once a year. and spay-neuter voucher program, which provides affordable vaccines and medical care for low-income residents. If they come to us, they can apply for that through the state, and we assist them with that process. That being said, the one thing I wanted to point out is in 2014, when I came in, we had 22 active keeping of animal permits. We're now up to, let's see, as of December, we had 34, which is an increase of about 63% since I started. That's the next big thing, is owning chickens. So 63%, that's pretty big, and I say approximately 40 active permits because we've already had quite a bit just the beginning of this year. What I wanted to mention as well, and it may answer a question ahead of time, our vehicle maintenance and fuel comes out of the police department budget. It is not in my budget at all. And let me see. And I believe I will answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, Officer Lipinski. President Flowers, any questions? Council-
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor St. Hilaire?
Yeah, thank you. I guess, thank you for the presentation, really helpful to learn more about your department. How much time would you say you spend on code enforcement versus investigations versus community outreach? How would you bucket that?
Definitely the two biggest things that keep us busy is code enforcement and investigations. Community outreach in terms of public education, I think that falls into every call. No matter how you look at it, whether it's an investigation or it's just code enforcement, there's always an educational piece. Like I said, my approach is education first. And education last when you look at it. I would say probably 50-50 between code enforcement and investigations to answer your question. And I think community outreach falls into just about every call.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
Councilors, any questions for Officer Lipinski? Hearing none, thank you very much. I just want to say I really appreciate the review and the presentation is very helpful to lots of different ways to sort of learn and take in information. It's great to have both the oral presentation as well as something in writing to take a look at as we follow along. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. No, you're most welcome. And yeah, a lot of people look at the animal control department and think about it as, when it used to just be a dog officer. And it really has grown into a lot more. And I don't think I've ever laid it out like that. And I even sat back and said, wow, we do a lot. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 7 o'clock, and Mayor Cahill is here. And Mayor Cahill, Your Honor, good evening. And if you'd like, you can introduce your staff who are here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too thought that would be a nice idea, so I'll go ahead and start with that.
This is on page 18 for the mayor's budget.
So, yes, actually, I'll start with just a quick thought, then I will introduce the executive office team. About 3 weeks ago, I would typically have been here to present the budget and share a message with you folks, but I was home with COVID doing my round of isolation, so sorry I wasn't physically with you a few weeks ago, but happy to be here tonight, and I appreciate all the thought and professional work that's going into these budget hearings. Thank you all for that. I want to thank Mr. Ailes, which I always do but can never do enough. I think you folks have a good appreciation for how both talented and committed and professional he is in his job, and thank him now. I'll probably thank him again, but I want to thank him tonight for all he does to make sure that this city runs every day throughout the year and year in and year out, and probably can't be said enough. I do want to acknowledge and thank the members of, we're all here except for Ronnie. So our Constituent Services Director, Ronnie Jacobson, is covering an airport commission meeting tonight. Otherwise, she'd be with us. Jocelyn Ruel Kersker, our Chief of Staff, Martha Lewis, our Executive Secretary, Irina Keefe, our Sustainability Director, and Catherine Barrett, our Director of Grants, all incredibly talented and committed and hardworking, and I know you appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to all of them because it's a team effort every day of the week and every day of the year. So thank them both for being here and all they do for our city throughout the year. Beyond that, you know this budget, and I think probably best if I just offer to answer any questions you may have about the executive office budget.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Members of the subcommittee, President Flowers, any questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here, and thanks also to all the members of your team, with whom I'm sure all members of the council interact regularly, but I definitely have appreciated my interactions with all of your department heads and staff. I just wondered if you could provide us any update. There's obviously two line items here that I think are related in some ways. One is 51141 on page 18, and the other is 55000. I know they're not exactly tied together, but if you have any sense of where you see things going within your administration for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director, I know that position has been posted, but I also see that the 55000 is to allow us to implement recommendations from the race equity audit. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about those two lines and what you're thinking about or where you see things going.
Sure. Thank you, Madam President, for that. As you know, we've been in the process of interviewing for a new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. And my hope is that we'll have somebody in that job this summer. We're well into the process, got some great candidates. We also have the incredible benefit of having Mrs. Ruel Kersker, Dr. Morgan, and Mr. Toppin joining me as the final round interview selection team. So we're grateful and appreciative for everybody's involvement. And as I said, the goal is sometime this summer we'll have somebody in the position. And the 150,000, you remember from 2 budget cycles ago, because we agreed to make that money available, and the first go-round, a chunk of it went towards the first Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director position, which Mr. Abu Toppin filled, and that he filled, if you remember, in January, so that was about a half year in the first budget year. We did, I think it was 3 anti-racism, unconscious bias trainings for local elected officials, department heads, and other forward-facing staff, or should I say public-facing staff. And those 3 things spent the money in the first year. And then last year, it was Abu's salary and the balance of the cost of the racial equity audit. And so this year, what we're looking at is some additional, probably some additional trainings, and taking a first swipe at, or first step with the recommendations, with the action items that came from the audit. Some of them, as you can see from reading through it, we're already in the process. We've already been working at some that will be new initiatives, and then. It'll be less than a full 12 months of salary on the DEI director position, so it'll be that, and in addition to anything we do with the recommendations and with additional training. And we may collectively look to these combination of lines and that 150,000 in the future, and it may be that it's time to up that at some point. But for now, I think as we're looking ahead to the first year of addressing the audit findings, I think we're comfortable with what we've got in front of you.
Thank you. May I ask one other?
Yes.
It's unrelated, but thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. And I definitely I'm looking forward to, and I think the council is, in September, having that presentation from the consultants and really digging into that audit and what the council can do to support recommendations happening in our community. I also had a question on page 19 as well, line item 53010. Which is the homelessness services. And so I was just curious, I know it's noted as emergency shelter and support of Beverly's homeless population. I know we don't always run an emergency shelter. I'm just curious if you have thoughts about where or how that money, if you have thoughts about where that might go for this fiscal year, or that's something that's sort of being held so that we can respond as the year unfolds.
Yes, as some councilors know from the history of this, there are several lines here that we put together RFPs, and they're a bid process, and we have some local, typically not-for-profits, who respond to these. This one has been one that was utilized in the past, but nobody has responded to it in the last, well, in recent budget time. So I think with some of the conversations that we've been having in the community, we're hopeful that there'll be an interest in responding to this one this year.
Thank you. And I definitely am in support of having this here and budgeted, because I think it's a community question. These are our neighbors who are homeless at the moment, and so having this money here so that we can support them in ways that unfold, I think is great. I'm very supportive of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor St. Hilaire.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm on page 21, the reserve for unforeseen. My experience, typically, there are some things that you are foreseeing that lead to this budget line item, and I guess I'm just curious if you have any further detail on what the $250,000 might be used for this year.
I'm going to turn to Mr. Ailes on this one, as he has a better collective memory than I do on some of the things that we've needed to use this for in recent years.
Sure. Just to give you a sense, Counselor, of what it typically can be used for and does get used for is from time to time during collective bargaining situations, we may need to look to this to fund a portion of either some retro salary or some prospective salary in the given year that we might settle a contract. There are other areas within the budget that can fluctuate from time to time, like, for example, retirements. We try to do our best in terms of estimating what we think the cost will be. There's a reserve for for separation of service to handle most of those costs. But, for example, in 2018, we spent over $500,000 in that category alone, and the budget wasn't sufficient to handle that, so we looked to the unforeseen to support that. The upside from your seat of the unforeseen is that it cannot be utilized for just whatever we decide. We need to come back before the council to utilize it and explain why it's necessary in a given situation. We may need it for snow and ice. We may need it for a legal settlement. We may need it for any number of issues I'm sure that you could all imagine can take place over the course of a year. And keep in mind, we're building this budget pretty much 15 months before the end of the fiscal year, so there's a lot that is unforeseen that we need to prepare for.
Just a follow-up question, if I may.
Please.
So I guess why go that road versus coming to us for a free cash expense?
Because this builds it into the budget so that we know the resources can be dedicated towards it. If it's insufficient in a given situation, we collectively would do everything we can within the existing appropriation to handle what needs get thrown demands get thrown our way. You may recall back in 2015 with the tremendous winter we had where we just got hit storm after storm after storm. We were in a $2 million deficit in our snow and ice budget that year. And we, through a relatively small appropriation for free cash, along with this unforeseen, and kind of trying to pull as much money out of other areas of the budget, we were able to absorb that and not carry any of the deficit forward. So it's a combination of everything. We think typically we spend about $250,000 in these unforeseen amounts in a given year. So it feels like a good placeholder for us, but we could go over it, could come under it.
Thank you. I have one other unrelated question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Just on page 19, related to the Mcpherson Center Youth Services. I know there's been a lot of broad talk about the future of that facility and relationship, and I'm just curious if there's any update on that, or if this reflects an as-is projected relationship.
Yes, so this particular line, and I think you're aware of this, just to say it, This goes with our agreement with the YMCA to run those services, to run all the programming and services at Mcpherson, and that's been in place since 1993, when the city, faced with a significant revenue deficit and in danger of going into state receivership, struck an agreement with the Greater Beverly YMCA to do that. So that's been in place in an ongoing fashion. In terms of the potential project at the teen center, as you know, we brought an owner's project manager on board. We had an initial onboarding meeting with them, and then there were some snags around the contract, which have since been ironed out. And we have a meeting scheduled, I think, next week, or later this week, next week, to kind of reboot with them. And as you know, I've been brought several appointments forward that you folks have approved to reconstitute the permanent building committee. And beyond that, our sense is that we need to have the involvement of the Ward 1, 2, and 3 councilors in that effort particularly, as well as the Youth Collaborative, the Recreation Commission, and I don't want to miss anybody, but also joining together with that permanent building committee. So there's a range of folks who really need to come to the table soon, because there'll be a couple things going on. One will be an evaluation of the physical plant and campus. Another will be a discussion of the programming and the services that have been in place and what the needs look like today, and how to kind of marry that campus and facilities, right, physical plant, with also what kids need these days. I say kids, young people, and what they're going to need going forward. So I hope there's going to be real reimagining of all that as well. But where we had hoped it would kick off a couple months ago, it's about to kick off in the next week. And I think we're going to try to get very active through the summer in convening those groups. And we want it to be a very inclusive process. So those are just some thoughts on who to make sure is at the table, and I think we'll be looking for opportunities to open that table up and bring as many people as we can into that conversation.
I appreciate that update. I think all that sounds really, really great, and I was just, I guess, curious if this was sort of, I don't know if we have a contract or an agreement with the Y, if this sort of bakes us in for another year, or if that stuff can happen independently and figure it out as we go.
Yeah, we've had some conversations about, really taking a look at what's offered, because, the executive director of the Y, your former colleague, Mr. Flaherty, Tim Flaherty, he sat with us recently and expressed some of their ideas and thoughts and needs. And so I think we're going to be revisiting the whole agreement in the near future. But this is this coming year's budget is in some ways, a bit of a status quo on that front as we start to figure out the rest.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mayor, I have one question, really, I suppose maybe two. But first and foremost, I just want to say I want to compliment you on your talented team. I found them as a city councilor to be terrifically responsive, diligent, and productive, and great to work with. So I just want to compliment all of those who are here this evening, as well as Ronnie Jacobson, who is not here as well. So thank you. And one question I have, which while both chiefs are here and our sustainability officer, is across city facilities, one of the things I've noticed, especially as the cost of energy goes up, are some of the budgets in some of the individual departments that talk about their energy costs. And so I'm not sure the best way, I mean, I'll talk with each department head about those, but I wonder if, just from a broad point of view, you might want to, while Ms. O'Keefe is here, to if you have any comments on things like the size of the electric cost at the police department, the new police station, opportunities maybe at Mr. Foster's emergency sort of preparedness center, and some of the other places that we haven't really talked about before. So we can talk about it some other time if you think that would be more appropriate, but while everyone is here, I thought maybe I would toss out the question if you have any comments you'd like to make on that.
Sure. Well, obviously, we are all in the midst of some pretty tough times in terms of costs of heating, cooling, vehicle fuel, to the extent that it's oil and gas, right? And we also know that with the new police station, 32,000 square feet versus something south of 10,000 with the old station and combined off-campus space, there is initially a significantly greater, electricity cost. We also are in the permitting phase at present for the solar canopy over the parking lot at the police station and the rooftop, which, when eventually built, will help with that load, and will begin to, will begin to offset both the usage and the cost. So that's one point on that particular building. We're on a march towards decarbonizing our vehicle fleet. We're trying to do it as quickly as we can. Each of the vehicles that we have has a useful life. You need to utilize that. There's a lot of sunk cost. There's a lot of embodied carbon in all those vehicles. So, we don't want to prematurely retire them, nor should anybody. And yet, we are trying to buy EV and or hybrid wherever possible. It's not possible with some of the larger pieces of equipment. We've taken a run at, we have some EVs in the police department. We don't have EVs yet in the patrol car fleet, but we're hoping to be there soon. There are a couple things to be worked out still. Certainly not with the acceleration of the EVs, which is like that, but with some of the other kind of utility needs of the vehicle. And as I said, with some of the bigger equipment, certainly fire trucks not yet, some of the bigger DPS equipment, but we're on a path to that, and we certainly want to electrify as quickly as we can responsibly. And by responsibly, I mean we want to cut the emissions as quick as we can, and we also need to make sure that the financial investments prove out, that the equipment doesn't break down on us. So it's there's a lot of this equipment, medium to heavy sized vehicles, it's still with some of the manufacturers in the development phase and in the proving out phase. So we're looking to make those strides as quickly as we can.
Thank you. My last question has to do with these books, which you and I have had an opportunity to talk about a little bit. So for the benefit of the counselors who are not familiar with these, every year since 1840, and these booklets have been, these bound volumes have been prepared and delivered by the mayor's office to the city council. It contains records going back as far as 1676 for the early records of Beverly. And they tell both a financial and narrative story or history of Beverly since its inception up until 1968. During your term of office, but apparently even longer than that, the volumes of the official city records are not in the clerk's office, and we don't know where they are. And I wonder if you could give some kind of update on your efforts to locate those records and sort of bring them up to their current dates.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And you're right. I wasn't in office in 1968. I was at Centerville Elementary School, and I did march in the Tercentenary, is that the right word, parade, the longest parade I've ever marched in, and I was only 6. It was celebrating Beverly's 300th year incorporation as a 1968 as a town. City came later. But I think as you and I have talked about, we've been trying to gather the information. Some of those are in the clerk's office, I believe. Mrs. Lewis and I have been working on that, and we've determined that most of what you're looking for has been gathered, is in her possession, has been. Not all of it has been turned over to the clerk's office. So we're trying to get that sorted now and hope to have everything that you need to be able to look back on the last handful of years in front of you, I'm saying before the end of this month. And then we're looking to try to, I'm not sure streamline's the right word, but we're looking to try to get a better better method, a better format for each department. Because what you're referring to is that department by department annual report due by mid-August into the council from the administration. So we're working on trying to get you everything that is backlogged, and also try to make sure that for department heads, we format things more consistently and make it, I think, a more doable project for some, because some of the departments, it can run away and get unwieldy pretty quickly, that report. So we're working on it. We hope to have something in front of you before the end of this month.
Terrific. Thank you for the update. Counselor Feldman.
Thank you. I had just a couple of questions, all kind of related to the same line item on page 18, 51140, the sustainability budget. If you could refresh my memory in terms of, I know we have 40% of the salary for 15 weeks and then 60% for the remaining 37 weeks of a year. So was that, I know that this was due to an angel investor contributing to this position. I didn't realize it doesn't run concurrent with the term. It was the end of fall when we accepted this?
So thanks, Councilor Feldman, for the question. Yes, we have a very generous donor who said, I would like to fund a significant percentage of the first 3 years of this position. We sorted that out that summer, and you folks approved accepting the gift and approving the position. And we hired, and Ms. Keefe started in that position just about mid-October of that year. So for the 3 years are run based on the anniversary of her hire and her beginning work. And that's why you'll see, so it was 80% of the cost of the position was paid by the donor in year 1, 60% in year 2, and it'll be 40%. So Ms. Keefe will mark her second anniversary in the position just about October 15th and start her 3rd year with us. So that's why you see the 60% for the first, 3.5 months, and then 40% is what is covered, so 60% is what we'll pay for the balance of the year.
Okay. So along those lines, similar to Councilor Hausman's question about sustainability and the city's projects, and I've worked with Ms. Keefe a lot, and she's wonderful, but there's a ton of, it's kind of like that department touches as we move forward into the future. It's really part of every single department and budget and the way of the future. And not to make a pun, but is it sustainable that the entire department budget is is the whole budget the salary of one person for this department in the city? Or is there any other infrastructure in place in terms of the funding for specifically sustainability efforts that go beyond? Because I do want to make sure that this position, as we move forward, is supported in a way that has the department and the resources around it to use the runway that we've been so generously been given and actually have success in short order.
So a couple thoughts. One, and Mr. Ailes just pointed me and reminded me, I know that there's a certain amount of money in public property that is identified and held aside as supporting sustainability efforts. 150,000, page 96.
I'm not going to flip there, but so.
And then the other piece of this is that we're very mindful and attentive to how much work is on Ms. Keefe's plate, and how much longer this work can be done by one person.
The green, 55899. Okay.
And I'll just read the descriptive. Funding for green initiatives such as EV pilots, grant matches, emission reduction, et cetera. Also includes $30K for MVP grant match. That is the Bass River and Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant that we have applied for. And if we are to we haven't received it yet. Yeah, so the application's in. That's for a study of the Bass River watershed and to get a better handle of where we will be come 2070 projections and the projected sea level rise, both normally and during storms when you get your high tide storm surge and the kind of flooding to expect, and just what to expect, in that area. So that's an example of how the money gets spent.
So now that.
And the other piece here is this funding is derived from landfill solar pilot and lease agreements. We take in more than that annually on those combination of things. But it's a piece of that goes here.
Okay, so, and to follow up on that then, if that is, now that we're here on 96, is there a reason why in 2022 then, it was higher, now it's down 23% when the needs are kind of increasing? I just want to make sure we're moving in the right.
Absolutely. And Mr. Ailes is looking, and if there's any need to get back to you on that, we certainly will take a note and do so. If you're ready, otherwise we can get back, no. There you are.
So your questions about the 2022 revised budget level, is that?
On page 96 then,
Yep.
that it looks like it's down 23%?
Yeah, so that's when compared to the 2022 revised budget. So what occurs from time to time is, at the start of 2022, it was budgeted at $150,000. You can see that's the second number in from the right. And what happened was there was a carry forward, or a PO, if you will, into FY22, which pushes that budget up. But it was a commitment made prior to the start of FY22. And so that's why it inflates that up.
Got it.
And when it's drafting the percentage in the last column, it's comparing this year's request compared to the revised budget figure.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
And Counselor, if you would like, and I can imagine you might want to, we can get you folks the detail on those POs, looking back, unless Ms. Keefe has it in her head. It's okay if you don't.
I don't mean.
Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you. I'd love to hear the support for increased resources for sustainability. Love to hear that. Thank you, Councilor Feldman. So yes, the executive budget only contains my salary, but there's, I think, is it 80,000 or so in the green initiatives line under public services that are meant to purchase things and to run programs in the community to improve sustainability. That includes purchasing new electric vehicle charging stations, purchasing the networking and the kind of maintenance plans for our existing charging stations. I believe last year's contained quite a large match for the school buses that we had purchased. And we also have funding coming in from grants that we've pulled in. So we do need more kind of staff support to do this work in the community. So far, I think to date, I've been focusing more on the municipal projects, but we have issued a bid this morning, an invitation for bids for a community energy coach. That will be a part-time position that is fully grant funded. We secured $180,000 for a 3-year project with Mass Save. So that's gonna, help us support a 15-hour per week person who will spend all of their time in the community working with our residents and our small businesses to improve their access to energy efficiency programs. So we are working kind of on multiple scales there. Just adding that. Thanks.
That's great. Great. Happy to hear it.
If I may just follow up on that, are there any other places in the budget other than the ones we just focused on for Ms. Keefe's salary and this line item that also sort of have a piece of this sort of sustainability other than the grants work that Ms. Barrett does?
Well, I can tell you that when you see this, when Dr. Trochik is here Wednesday, there are a couple of smaller lines in there for trying to restart and ramp up existing composting efforts in the schools, and also for stipending some support for school personnel to work with those efforts. So those are a couple of fairly modest lines, but you'll see those. Anything else we're missing right now?
Because that's a great question. In general, when you look at some of the larger departments that make capital purchases, the budgets exist in the departments that are operating. So, for example, Chief O'Connor and Chief Lasher here have money set aside for vehicle purchases, for example. We'll do an analysis when they're ready to purchase vehicles, their needs, what's available, and if there's a need to fill the gap, that's when we might look to this green initiatives to kind of get them to a more greener solution. So it should really be viewed to some degree as a supplement to other resources that are in every department, because we're all doing this work. It's just we may not have the resources and may need to look to the green initiatives budget to help support and push us over the finish line.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see sort of maybe it'd be cumbersome to do it, but to sort of see the through line of, I mean, I think, Mayor Gale, you've done a terrific job with your administration in terms of working towards decarbonization and sustainability efforts. But it would be interesting to see sort of the through line through the various different places in the budget where all of these pieces sort of come together. And maybe there's no easy way to do that other than sort of look at individual departments and their sort of sliver of that. But to sort of have an integrated sense of it would be great. But I also know Mr. Ailes is pretty busy right now, so maybe that's something that we could get to at some point down the road.
Absolutely. And look, I appreciate the kind words. We've done this together, and any number of you have been involved on different things. From the Bring Your Own Bag ordinance, is that still what we call it? And, to a lot of the great work with our Clean Energy Advisory Committee and some of the commitments we've made together. So, this is a partnership, and I think it's a fantastic one. I will say, I touched on the vehicles earlier in response to the chairman's question. I can be a little more specific. We've got 2 Teslas and a BMW in the police department. We had 2 BMWs. They really were leased without paying a lease. They were donations, but we had the option to purchase them after 3 years, was it? And so the police department purchased one, and we purchased one for the health department, for one of the health inspectors. And Chief O'Connor made an effort at buying an EV, was a Ford 150? It was the Ford Interceptor. The Ford Interceptor. And what happened was there were some bugs with the model, and Ford said, we'll get them worked out, and hopefully next year's model will work better. But with this one, we were able to turn it back and get didn't want to, because we took a run at an EV, but hopefully next year's model and the year after, they'll have sorted that, and those vehicles will work to meet our needs. And when they do, that'll be great, because we use a lot of pickups and larger SUVs, and we can find electric and hybrid options soon. I'm really grateful that the fire department tried this year, and I'm also grateful that the dealer they work with helped them get out of it and get back into another vehicle that they needed on the road more quickly. So we'll keep working that for sure.
Thank you. Councilor Sweeney, did you have a question?
Councilor Feldman actually covered my questions.
Great.
So thank you for your answers, Mr. Mayor. Much appreciated.
Councilor Rotundo.
Thank you. Mayor, just to go back on the lines 53010 and 53016, excuse me?
Which page?
I'm sorry, page 19.
Thank you.
I know the first one you answered, which thank you, but the second one was the outreach, and you have it budgeted for $25,000, which is an increase, which is fine, but we're seeing that it hasn't been spent at all this year. So is there a reason, or is that something that, as well as being bidded out?
I think is it any more than a timing? Yeah, it's a timing issue.
Okay, so that's what it is, it's just a matter of not being, okay. That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor.
Councilor Bowen.
Thank you, and that was actually one of my questions, so already answered. And it's just helpful in terms of the presentation, especially as someone newer to the budget. Some things are very obvious, like a summer program probably won't have spent the money until the summer, or salaries are only going to be spent through, they're paid monthly. So some of those are very obvious. Some, it's helpful to get an explanation up front of why the either fluctuation from year to year in lines that fluctuate significantly, or when it's just a timing issue, why money hasn't been spent yet, reflected in the actuals, but is still projected to be spent. But just wanted to follow up on those lines around outreach as well as the youth activities line. Just curious how those work with plans to address the intense needs right now and the funding that we have available from ARPA or other sources. I know we've had a lot of discussions about the fact that there are, state and federal programs available to people who are experiencing homelessness or food insecurity or have other needs that are resulting from the long-term impacts of the pandemic, but that we as a city could provide better service in connecting people, whether that is through support that's contracted out to nonprofits and or through additional, even temporary city staff who can be those kind of navigators. And so just curious if there are plans that aren't reflected here because they're not operating budget money, but that would provide the services that people need. And then maybe a follow-up specifically on youth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, thank you, Counselor. I think that goes back to what I touched on earlier with the conversation with Mr. Flaherty leading up to budget, and a recognition that, this line stayed where it's been for a period of time, and this particular summer and year coming up, we're likely to be, we're planning to sit with them again after budget, and probably look to tap some ARPA funds to further boost their efforts, particularly through the summer, but beyond. Well, why don't you say that? Do you mind?
The only other piece to that, Counselor, is you're all aware that we just recently launched a nonprofit grant program through ARPA, which will hopefully address some of the very, ideas that you're bringing to the table now. But until we get all the proposals and evaluate them all, we don't know what'll shake out of that. But it is available. It'll be, it's posted through, Jocelyn, is it 23rd or 24th? 24th. We'll be accepting applications, so.
Thank you. If I could just follow up, that is helpful, and I think especially the additional grant support, which I understood to be similar to the small business support in some ways in terms of filling gaps that nonprofits who have been serving people felt during the pandemic, and so to be able to continue to provide service are trying to fill some gaps now and going forward. And I think it just can't be said enough how great the needs are right now, and how while we do have some of that funding available, making the commitment to provide services today for particularly young people, but vulnerable people across our community is of the highest priority. And I know I have heard that from city staff across the board, and had hoped to see it reflected more strongly in the budget, in that youth services line, in some of these outreach lines, in some of the service lines. And I understand that we don't want to build in staff positions that we won't be able to maintain over the long term with long-term sources of funding, and really seeing the mismatch between some of those needs and some of these numbers. So it's encouraging to hear that there are some of those conversations underway, and maybe just thinking about how we can connect those conversations so that when we get a next report on ARPA funding, or when there are those next conversations about youth services, we're seeing the connection, and we can then talk about how the city is investing, when currently it's a little hard to say that with the numbers in front of us. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great and a fair point. I think one of the things we're trying to be mindful of is on the operating budget side, understanding that there are some growth pressures that we have no control over. And Mr. Ailes has pointed them out, and things like the pension mandated increases and the healthcare expected increases and so forth. And so looking to the ARPA funds for some of this youth need is really, we're thinking the better route in the near term. There's also a significant increase in the school budget that you're going to be talking about some on Wednesday, and I just want to touch on it now because, you know, $2.567 million in new state funding is fantastic. And Dr. Trochik will articulate well, I'm sure, how, you know, some of that has come because of a recategorization of poverty, of, you know, deeming our percentage of children who are economically disadvantaged. And, you know, that was changed downward a few years ago. It's being changed back upward in terms of how many people qualify. Also, the number of English language learners we have has made us eligible for additional funding. And, you know, then there was an attempt to address an inflationary component that had not been addressed in some years. So, you know, some of the new money in Chapter 70 is meant to help cover our basic needs. Some is an acknowledgement of enrollment increases and enrollment increases in certain categories, you know, classifications of students, which also necessitates additional local investment. So, you know, you see I think an appropriate ask coming from us for additional city money to the schools as well as the new Chapter 70. But taken together, that's a, you know, significant increase. So you put that with some of the other, you know, upward pressures that we don't get to say no to, like the state and federal mandate on pensions and our healthcare needs, and, you know, the basic contractually related increases across the board. And we've talked about this so many times. You know, what we do in local government is we provide services and we take care of our basic assets. And so the services are all delivered by our staff. So, you know, there's a lot there. And I think, you know, not to, I'll stop now, but to say, you know, some of these areas that we're looking to, you know, not increase or modestly increase in a line, and because we know that that's an area that there continues to be, we can look to the ARPA funds for some of that.
Maybe just one more point. Thank you. And I do think, you know, between youth services, those outreach workers, really excited to see at least an additional half position for outreach at the Council on Aging. But, you know, didn't see the support for funding youth workers in the Parks and Rec program that we talked about. Didn't see an increase in the youth services. So seeing those come from ARPA funds to test out how we can improve service at a reasonable cost while we have a year when we can try that, I think it's worth doing. So look forward to seeing that. And then my last question was just around the sort of on page 22 towards the end, in terms of transfers, really excited about the road work coming our way, the roads and sidewalks. And now that we're through the worst of pothole season and into the best of construction season, already seeing what past investments have meant and seeing some of that road work happening, which is very exciting. And pleased with that number that's coming in, especially since this is a year when we have a little space because of lower debt service and other things. But just wondering if you could speak to the other numbers in that line and how we were able to increase those numbers in past years as well, and whether sort of what that reflects. My guess is it's state funding coming in and that's reflected here somehow. But, you know,
Sure.
seeing those,
I'll ask
championing the high number this year, but it's actually not the high water mark on that page. So.
I'll ask Mr. Ailes to speak in a minute, but I just want to point out that 2.7 is our ask of you with the city dollars. With the initial Chapter 90 plus the money that the legislature and the governor put forward on the winter damage, right? We're at about another 1 point. No, we're like 4.1 million, right? Yeah. So when you take that all together, we're 4.1. And as we discussed in some meetings amongst ourselves, and we shared with you folks, we also anticipate spending up to $1 million in ARPA funds on infrastructure improvements in the Gloucester Crossing neighborhood, particularly on Beckford, and then in creating safer intersections and safer crossing and you know, and walking, biking, whatever routes, via the improvements to the signalized intersections at both Beckford and Elliott and Mcpherson and Elliott. So if you add that all together, we're really at 5 million-ish, and that's, and we know that's not going to get everything done people want done, for sure, but it's something real. Do you want to just touch on how it tends to roll in? Thanks.
So both of the lines on this page, actually all three, this is the area of the budget that allows us to transfer money out of this general fund into other funds, whether that's a capital fund, a trust fund, or some other type of fund. When the mayor puts his budget proposal before you, all that we're aware of at that point in time is a request for the road and sidewalk transfer. So that's the 2.7 that you see. But as the year goes on, if we collectively appropriate some funds out of free cash for a capital project, it flows through this line. So it actually increases the budget as free cash approvals get approved if they're transferred to capital funds. So the types of projects in this past year that you all were part of the vote has to do with the rescinding of the turf field, the loan order there. And so that was a significant amount. In addition to that, I think there was a $1.25 or $1.5 million as a starter fund for the renovation to City Hall. And so those are some examples of things that added to the FY22 budget to get it up to that level that you see in this report. Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor St. Hilaire, yes.
I just wanted to comment, I guess, in the exchange between Councilor Bowen and the mayor. I heard the mayor sort of defending, the budget and the services that we're providing here, and I think you're right. It's a $6.4 million increase and 25 new positions. I guess I keep coming back to, we also have grant money available, the ARPA funds. I know we're helping out small businesses with that program, the nonprofits. I keep going back to the taxpayers and, the decision, I guess, to go to the 2.5% again this year, given cost of living increases, inflation. That's my only concern, I think, about the budget is, I think we can all argue specific priorities, but, given the size of the increase and, just what's going on out there with families and seniors and taxpayers, whether or not that's something we should do. And, I guess just curious, if we were to go to 1.5% as we did, last year, where would you look, in your budget? Is there some place that you would go to first?
I guess the first thing I'll say, Counselor, is ultimately we set the tax rate at a different time of year than we're asking you to pass this budget, and so decisions don't get finalized on that until much later in the calendar year. The challenge with going to a lesser number than 2.5% is when you see the need for services and when you see the need for infrastructure investment and reinvestment. And I think, with that said, you make a fair point that, there's this one-time historic money. It does come with strings. We can't, well, let me take that back. A good chunk of it, is available for spending as we need, as lost revenue replacement. But I think that the challenge is, and there's a reason why most communities don't go less than the statutory allowed 2.5%. I mean, when you look at the buying power of the dollar from 1980, 81 to now, and every year Proposition 2.5, and you compare it to 2.5, you can see the disparity. And so, and I know you can come back and say, well, people face that same thing themselves, right, in their individual
And we did it
budget.
last year.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, these aren't easy conversations, but the reality is that, I think last year might have been the only time that Beverly's gone to less than the levy limit in 40-plus years. We did it very intentionally. It was able to leave roughly $1.1 million in the pockets of our taxpayers, and if we could do it again, we would. If we find that we can, we will. But it's a challenging thing to do when the kind of non-negotiables on budget growth are there, and the needs for as I said, both infrastructure investments and programmatic and service investments aren't really abating.
Yeah, and I recognize the balance, and I don't think anything that anyone's brought up is not worthy of financial resources. It's just, you read every day, costs are going up for people, and I hear it from folks in Ward 6 too, so, thank you.
Thanks.
Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. I realized one more thing I had circled that I didn't ask about, which was just the line for expenses. Seems unique in the executive budget compared to other departments. I was just curious what that covers as part of the personnel section. It's 51891.
What page are we on?
Page 19, the first line. And one thing, just I've been, as you're looking, sort of trying to match up across departments and understand, some things that show up, uniforms are in one place in one department and someplace else in another, and some of that consistency, it can be a little hard to figure out throughout the whole city budget, what are we spending on a category of items. So that's partially why, that's one of the lenses I'm looking through the book with, is how are these things sort of comparable across departments, and how do things stack up. So that was one that I hadn't seen that category in a personnel
So
section.
one of the things that the expenses line does cover periodically is professional development opportunities, conferences, meetings. There hasn't been much opportunity with COVID for anybody to go off-site or off-campus for any of that. And those, we're both careful about it and also attentive to it, because, those opportunities done right really bring a lot of value back to the community. When I go to a conference, I go with in mind trying to bring back one or two or three new things from that conference that are going to save the city money, create some grant opportunity we didn't know about, and, access. So those things are always front and center when I look at those types of meetings and conferences. And beyond that, for right across through both our department and across all departments, those professional growth and development opportunities really matter. And it can be hard to get some of our department heads to leave town. And when they come back, they typically say, wow, because it's important to, it's important to keep growing in their professions as well. And I know everybody kind of looks at things the same way. They're bringing back value for the community. That's not the only thing that funds by any stretch. And if you want some examples, we can provide some of that, and examples over recent budget years of how some of that has been ultimately spent.
Thank you, Mayor. While you are here, unfortunately, due to the passing of Dan Mcpherson, we no longer have a harbor master.
Right.
And I know sort of collectively here this evening are various people who can speak to the harbor master's budget, which is on page 69. So I would
Happy to
invite,
start if you're ready to turn to it.
I'd invite you or whomever you want to sort of designate on your staff to sort of talk with that, whether it's you or a combination of folks.
Yeah, I think some combination of Mr. Ailes, Chief Alasher, and I can probably help you out. What I can tell you is that after Dan Mcpherson passed, the chief had a couple of our sergeants really kind of jumped into that breach, and we also had a couple of assistant harbor masters who were working some number of hours in the off season as well. But Sergeant Henneberry, our traffic sergeant, and Sergeant Hathon both spent meaningful time trying to get on and stay on top of the operations, the functions of the office. It's taken us some time to get to real clarity with the state around harbor mastering in the post-police reform law era, and then in kind of with new sets of rules. And it became clear there are a couple ways that you can go. You could go law enforcement harbor master or civilian harbor master. We examined things, made the decision to go with a civilian harbor master's department and office. We've been, we advertised, we've been conducting interviews, and we've made an offer for that position and are awaiting the outcome of the basic checking. And so we're hopeful that that position will now be filled, and somebody new will be on the job for, as soon as we get out of school. I mean, we're past Memorial Day, but we're not really into the full season for recreational boating. So hopefully that'll be soon. And in the meantime, the basic operations are being met by our several assistant harbor masters working, off a schedule they put together. If you have questions on specific lines, I'm sure Mr. Ailes, our chief, could help you better with that.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Any questions from the subcommittee? I'm good. No, seeing none. Anyone else on the full council? Councilor Rotunda.
Just a couple of questions with the harbor master. So I know you said you're going to the civilian direction, but they won't have any authority on the water, correct?
No,
No
that's
enforcement
not correct.
authority of, with the law enforcement, because they're not able to.
Right. Our department was not operating as a law enforcement department. Very infrequently, there was a need to call for, from time to time, there was a need to call for support from other communities. And the several harbor masters in the, Salem Sound area, Danvers, Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, Manchester, all support each other as needed. And far less frequently, so very infrequently, there would be a need to call over to our police department and ask somebody to meet them down at the docks with an issue, or meet one of the harbor masters and actually get on a boat, very infrequently. So just to give you a sense of that.
Go ahead, Councilor.
So that was prior to post. I know post, right now it's a whole new ballgame regardless. We know that with what it is. And I know you were looking at either going with a law enforcement or going civilian. You chose the civilian, which is, I get that. But I know there has been issues that does arise, as you just said. So do you have a plan in place for that to happen if there is some sort of a scofflaw in the waters?
Yeah, I think, what you've got, since the harbor masters in Beverly have not been armed in the past and won't be in the future. And there's a dynamic on the water that I've been learning about. In order to maintain safety of the harbor master, assistant harbor master, and safety of the boaters that may need to be, that they may need to stop on the water, to have a conversation with, to check their registration, to talk with them about driving erratically or unsafely and those types of things. There's a really kind of a set of best practices around that, which is, meant to preserve everybody's safety first. And if there's a problem that necessitates a law enforcement presence, as I said, that happens very infrequently. By that I mean in the single digits per year, and even in the low single digits. There's been, when that's been deemed necessary, it's been a phone call to our dispatch and an officer meeting them either with somebody who's coming into the dock or with somebody they need them to go out on the water and speak to.
Do you have any idea when you think the harbor master would, I know you said you have maybe an offer made, but is there any?
Our hope is that
within
the
next
new
week,
person will
month?
be in by the end of the month.
Okay, that's it.
Today,
Thank
the 12th? Yeah, I think we're comfortable with that.
you. Okay, thank you, that's it.
Anyone else? Questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Your Honor. I think that that is it for your part of the budget.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
And next up, we have Chief O'Connor. Fire Department is page 59.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, fancy, thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Chief.
The Celtics are playing tonight.
Okay, yeah, can we see that?
Really small font. Here's a bigger version.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I did put together a quick handout for you that explains some of the bigger changes that are in the budget. Just starting real quick, if we dive right in, just a little bit about the department. There's some in there about the call statistics that we're hitting. We did 5,700 calls last year, which was the most that we've done. We're still very busy. About 60% of our calls are medical, but you can see over the last few months we've been very busy. Try to curb that stuff as best we can through prevention, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But what I did want to talk a little bit more about, again, tonight we're talking about the budget. So talk about some of the bigger lines that are in there. About 94% of our budget is all related directly to personnel. So as far as personnel goes, we have 64 line firefighters. Those are folks that are assigned directly to the trucks, if you will. They're the ones on where the rubber meets the road. And I got to tell you, between the line and the staff folks, I couldn't ask for better people. They're just tremendous in what they do every single day. And I truly appreciate everything that they do. So each group, there's 4 different duty groups that are comprised of those 64. There's a deputy chief that runs the group, oversees the day-to-day management of the emergency functions and kind of the administrative functions for that group. Then there's a captain, 3 lieutenants, and 11 firefighters. On each of those groups, they're broken up into 3 stations. The biggest change between really the years prior and my first budget last year was really the first year that we really intended to run 3 pumps and 1 ladder all the time. So we were all good enough to purchase new trucks for us. So we had a full-time ladder truck, something that we could actually truly run as a ladder truck. It was built for rescue. It was built for the types of calls that ladder trucks are meant to go on. And to have crews that were dedicated to those responsibilities on those calls, whether it be motor vehicle crashes or fires or water rescues, you name it. So that means we run 3 pumps, 1 at West Street, 1 at North Beverly, 1 at headquarters, and then the ladder truck runs out of the headquarters station as well. So each of those trucks runs with a minimum of 3 people on it. So that means each day we have a minimum of 13 firefighters on duty. So starts with the groups that are the full-time folks, if you will, those 16 that are assigned to the groups. But then what happens is when we have vacation, it's supplemented by overtime. So we make sure that we don't drop below 13. Years prior, we would drop down to the number of 10. So that resulted in a lot less overtime, but it really resulted in 1 less truck being on the road. That was the biggest impact. So on the staff side, we have 2 fire prevention officers, and they stay very busy. Right now, Captain Ryan Larissy and Lieutenant Jake Kryling are in there, and they're out constantly. They're out every day doing a whole bunch of different things. We're implementing a program. The first year in building is really, it's called the Compliance Engine, and what it does is they can only put their hands on so many properties. What this Compliance Engine does is all the folks that are required to have inspections, but not inspections of their fire alarm system, sprinklers, cooking units, stuff like that, that we don't actually get to go and see, and we're not required to go see. What it does is it gets our hands on those inspections. So at least we know that those inspections are being done. And I really anticipate that's going to be a great thing for us. And for the folks in the city, just making sure that they're going to be safe, that the owners of the buildings are actually going to have safe fire alarms, sprinklers, and so on and so forth. So we won't really see a good benefit of that for the next couple of years, but there's really no cost to us for that program. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I have 1 training officer, Captain Hart, 5 full-time fire alarm operators, 4 intermittents, and then Maria, who is just the best thing that's happened to the fire department in a very long time. She is great. She really does wonders to keep me in line. So can't say enough about her. I talked a little bit about the daily staffing, but there's a little bit in that. So contractual updates, we'll kind of hop into that. As far as this year's contract, there was a change in longevity that added a 30-year level to it. We didn't have that prior. So there are a few folks that did meet that, and you'll see another raise because there are increase in that line because there was also some folks that met the 10-year level this time. We have a very young department. We see a lot of turnover. On the one hand, we lose a lot of great experience and a lot of great people. But fresh blood is coming in on the other side. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts us in a couple seconds. The physical fitness stipend, we increased contractually from $250 to $350 per person. They have to run a course, so you have to run a mile and a half and do push-ups and sit-ups and stuff to qualify for that. An educational incentive for the fire alarm office, adding one certification for next generation 911 for our dispatchers. That added an additional $425 per person for them. They get a total of 4 stipends now. And then for the fire side, again, the educational incentive, we have an educational incentive that runs on college credits. So it added a master's degree level. We never had that in the past. And there are 3 members right now that do have master's degrees that are in the union, so. The firefighter line, so the fiscal '22 contract was a 2.25% raise, and then for '22 and '23, so you see that built into the budget. And then the second component you'll see that kind of makes the increase look a little bit larger is that last year, a portion of the first 6 months for 4 firefighters was covered by the SAFER grant. The SAFER grant expired in December, so as of then, 100% of the salaries for those members went back to the full budget. So it's a little bit of an increase as a result of that, too. We do have a grant in right now for 4 more. If we are successful, it's a long shot. If we are successful, it'd be 3 years, 100%. So the next increase you'll see is shift coverage. It's 12201 51323. That's on page 60. Again, this is where we're able to keep 4 trucks on the road. The best way to put this is that for years and years and years and years and years, our overtime budget was $220,000. What we would do is, at some point in the year, the overtime would be here, and we would have to drop staffing to make sure that we didn't run out of overtime money. We committed, working with the mayor, working with Bryant. Bryant's been phenomenal. I love working with Bryant. We committed to running 4 pieces so we could always have that rescue, that ladder truck in service, and the folks that man it, that staff it. So we had to find out where that overtime was. It was a painstaking process, literally 2 weeks of going through and adding what positions, when weren't we at 13, when were we at 13, and what it would cost. So we've been working very hard at that, and that's where that increase comes out. I think we're going to be right around that number, just a little bit more than that this year. Last year, there's actually a little bit more. Last year, we kind of goes through some other lines that we paid for overtime. Because of COVID, we had a bunch of people out, so we actually spent more than that on overtime last year, but the shift coverage line is going to come in right around that 490,000 number. So this year, the good thing is we've got positions filled. I'll talk a little bit about concerns I have with that in a couple seconds, but I do believe that the shift coverage number is much closer to where we need to be. And the next couple of slides just kind of go over where those numbers came from. I really don't want to bore you with them, but if you have any questions about them, I would certainly answer. So that's where the fiscal 23 shift coverage number came from. The other part of that is there is a 53 week, so I did add a little bit more for that 53rd week. So next line is training classes, 12201 51581. That's on page 61. That's a 10-hour contractual. It's basically 1 day of training, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a good opportunity for us to get folks out and do classes that they may not otherwise be able to get to. We try to train in-house. Captain Hart is phenomenal about getting folks out and training. Tough part about training on duty is it's constantly interrupted. We're doing 16, 17 calls a day. So just as you start to get into it, we got to go on a call. But again, they're really good about making sure stuff is getting done. But this is one way to do that. The other thing in this contract that we had was quarterly officer meetings. That was a huge benefit to me, to be able to get the officers in one room and just say, listen, this is where we're at, this is where we're going, what do you need from me? And try to get some of that feedback. So I'm happy to say we've implemented that, and it's going well so far. So longevity was another one that changed. Again, it's contractual. That's 12201 51521 on page 61. And we had a few members that bumped up to that first, that level. I think we talked about this one already a little bit, but we did have some hit that 10-year mark. And then the forestry line, 12207 58220, that's on page 64. We have the 4 staff positions. My training officer, Matt Hart's actually driving around in his own pickup truck right now. So this is to kind of replace that. Unfortunately, we had a couple vehicles that didn't last as long as we'd hoped. I am looking at the alternatives for gasoline-powered cars. In our world, we just have to make sure we're getting the right thing. And what I've kind of found frustrating right now is I've actually looked to some of the other dealers. I was talking to the Toyota fleet folks the other day. They won't even take on new customers, new fleet customers, because they just can't get cars. So working on that. Got a couple things that we're looking at, but this would be a staff vehicle for one of my fire prevention officers. Matt's going to get rolled in someplace else, but he will no longer have to run around in his own car, so. Maintenance of radios. This is one I actually wasn't going to talk about, but it's kind of an interesting one. We were able to get a grant a couple of years ago, so if you take a look in maintenance of radios, it looks like there's an exorbitant increase this year. And it's really not the case. We were able to fund a bunch of new radios, mobile and portable, on a federal grant. So this year, the maintenance for radio cost was down a little bit. But this coming year, we will be starting, we're going to have to start replacing batteries, and we damage caller microphones on calls and stuff like that, so that's where that money does go to. Just for kind of give you an idea, each of our radios cost about $7,800. They're very expensive. So, again, a couple of concerns that I've brought up that just kind of keeping an eye on things is we have 2 firefighters that are going to be going to the academy in August for 10 weeks. That takes them off of the line. We have 2 firefighter retirements coming up. I just found about one today, so we're looking at July and September for retirements. And then I have actually 3 deputy chiefs that are going to be leaving us. Deputy Mike McCadden is leaving this in a couple weeks after a long career. He's a great help for us. And then I have potentially 2 more leaving next July. So big shoes to fill, but got some really good people up and coming to fill them. So. And then we got a few folks that are in the military. That's what happened to us last year. We had a bunch of people on military orders, so we were short early in the year and kind of took a whack at the overtime budget early. So don't foresee that right now. Haven't heard anybody getting on orders yet, but the retirements are something that we'll be looking at and keeping an eye on. We did fill Mike McCadden's spot early, so that position's actually already been filled. So again, quick rundown of some of the changes, but I know everybody's looking forward to basketball, so if any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to try to address them.
Thank you very much, Chief. Councilor St. Hilaire.
I don't have any questions on your budget necessarily, and I just want to compliment you on doing a great job, and I agree, you have a great group of firefighters. I did have a question on your presentation, though, on page 2, where you show the call volume. I think you referenced 5,700 calls a year or something like that. Just curious about the impact of the development downtown. I see the big red, obviously, for the downtown, and I see on the next page response times. And, you know, again, as it relates to your budget being comprised mostly of staff, you know, do you foresee a need, you know, as the city continues to grow, you know, how do you judge when to make a request to the mayor's office?
So we'll keep an eye on the numbers. I'll tell you right now, downtown has always been our busiest call volume. Downtown has always been the busiest station. The busiest crew is always the North Beverly station, because there's only one truck that runs up there. So especially when you look at the numbers downtown, and then we take a look at the response time chart, the blue is what we really want in that blue and purple. That's what we really want in that response time chart. We want those numbers under 3 minutes. When we, just going back a couple of years to only running 1 truck out of headquarters, when you see that big red blob down there, that truck is running and a second call comes in. It means somebody else has to come from North Beverly or West Street to make up to fill those voids. And that's where real long response times come from. So now that we've got 2 trucks that are running in the densest part of as far as call volume goes, part of the city, it definitely helps our call volume in that sense. As far as building goes, we will definitely keep an eye on where we're at. But I'm going to tell you straight up, the most important thing and probably the biggest thing that's happened to this department is getting back to that ladder company. I cannot tell you how important that was to this city. I've been ringing that bell for a while, and again, really happy to be working with the people that understand what we're talking about now, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, appreciate that. Good.
Thank you. Councilor Flowers, do you have any, President Flowers, do you have any questions?
Either way, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for just helping us. I feel like you and also your predecessor have always really been helpful to me in understanding some of what you talked about today, which is the impact for firefighters uniquely to when staffing kind of comes in those groups. being down one firefighter actually impacts a whole group of firefighters or the apparatus. So I appreciate everything I've learned. One of my questions for you was, with being able to run an additional truck, have you seen an impact in how much we have or have not relied on shared aid or reciprocal aid?
All right, so with mutual aid, honestly, as soon as we strike a working fire,
Yes.
my entire department is working, which means that somebody is coming from Salem or Danvers. So we're always going to rely on mutual aid. Just the NFPA, as far as us staying safe on the fire ground, the minimum numbers are 16. So if we're 13, we're automatically a little bit below that. So we're always relying on those help on those folks to come in. And we have some really good mutual aid partners. And we, like I said, we'll always be dependent on mutual aid.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yes, sure.
Do you feel, thank you for that, that's really helpful. And I know you're talking about the grant that you had applied for to be able to hopefully potentially increase the firefighter staff, but are we able, with the department that you have, are we able also to provide mutual aid when we're called upon? Do you feel like we're able to, are we equipping you to be able to be a good mutual aid partner, I guess is my question.
So what happens when we send a apparatus out of town mutual aid, and we do it pretty regularly, we've been in Salem probably 3 or 4 times in the last month and a half, we'll call back a group of 3 firefighters to staff one of our extra trucks. So as long as we've got the trucks, the spare truck in service to be able to do that, and it does is we'll be down one truck for maybe half an hour, but we are able to get that piece back in service, so.
Thank you. And I just want to add also my thanks along with Councilor St. Hilaire's. I feel like I've had the occasion, sometimes working downtown myself, there's been times that in my workplace we'll have to call for support, and of course all of our first responders come, but because we happen to be located so close to you all at Central Fire Station, I've had occasion to interact with many of your team, and just always appreciate the breadth of what our fire department staff is doing, including, as I understand, sometimes going to calls to help residents with all kinds of things, not always just medical, but sometimes just assistance for some of our seniors in the community, all kinds of questions they don't know who else to turn to. They often call you and your team. So thank you for being kind of that community helping presence.
Thank you. I try to tell my folks every time they go out the door, they have the ability to positively impact somebody. It may not seem like a big deal going out, but it's a big deal to somebody. And I'm really glad that they appreciate that and they look at that every time they go out. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have 2 questions, Chief O'Connor. One comment. One, it was great to spend a lot of quality time with you at Central to really understand and really appreciate the work that you do and all of the first responders in your department do. So thank you very much for that. I don't want to go over duplicative information, but just I'd like to touch for a moment on diversity, equity, and inclusion in your department. With all of the retirements that you either have or you see coming, is the fire department subject to the sort of I guess I will call them restrictions around civil service and veterans preference that make it more challenging to recruit a diverse population to serve in your department?
We do work within the civil service system, so what happens is they'll put a list together, and then they'll send us a number of names that are based upon the number of positions that we have open. And then we can choose from those names, and we can pass over people if there is a reason, a legitimate reason, to pass them over. As far as specifically hiring in that direction, it's not something that civil service really kind of is built to. Yeah. I think you're familiar with the civil service system enough to know that we can't just hire based on that. So.
Right, thank you.
I think, if I could just add on that too, I think we can do, and we should be doing a better job in getting out and encouraging people to take the test is one place for us to start. Because I know that, I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't think that I think there's a lot of people out there that just don't even know to take the test, that don't know that the jobs are available, or don't know how that process works. I have learned that over time to see how little people really know about the system that we hire with. So I think that is one way that we can kind of try to address that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, my question really has to do with page 65 and the public safety dispatch. If you could just sort of give us an update on the status of transferring the two dispatch operators you have sort of up in the attic, in the back at Central, and when they're going to be going to the police station, and just all the issues and timing around that, if you would.
I will answer that to the best of my ability. There might be some other...
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to let you folks know that I think you're all aware, we've been in the process of posting and interviewing for the dispatch supervisor position, and we're at the point of offering and trying to nail down a hire there. So that'll be the first of the civilian positions. The plan and expectation is soon after that, as in this fall and into the fiscal year. There'll be trainings done for those fire alarm operators who choose to come over. We still don't know if it'll be all 5 or some number of them. But eventually, as you know, that operation will be one operation at the new police station. We built the dispatch center, right? So the fire alarm and the, right now we have a primary and a secondary PSAP. What does it stand for?
Public safety answering?
Thank you. Public safety answering point. So the primary is the first call in for an ambulance or police, and if there's a fire call with it, that goes over to the fire alarm operators. That's all going to be brought under one, into one space in the dispatch center we built, and it will be staffed up and all civilian at a certain point. And the goal, and I'm going to turn it back to the chiefs and Mr. Ailes a bit on timing and where the money shows itself. Is that best to do there? Thanks.
That's all right, thanks. Yeah, so the money on page 65 represents the full year's salary for the dispatch supervisor that the mayor just spoke to. And then in addition to that, there are costs for, excuse me, let me just refresh my memory here. Yeah, so there's also 2 full-time dispatchers hired in the fall timeframe within this first line. The theory being that when the switch gets flipped and this goes live, assuming some or all of the now fire dispatchers shift over, we would be coming back before the council, the mayor would, to request the funds that currently exist in the fire department budget for those 5 dispatchers to be shifted into this public safety dispatch budget, because this is a co-managed budget from both chiefs, and the mayor will manage it collectively.
Thank you. I know from when Chief Lalasher gave me a terrific tour of the new police station, I saw the dispatch area. It's all set up. There are some police officers who are there. Has the main timing of this, of the sort of transition been determined by the hiring of the dispatch supervisor, or have there been other issues involved in trying to make this long-awaited transition?
Yeah, well, I think, and the mayor may want to speak to this a little bit, but it's been a very complicated process, and certainly our dispatch functions and the service that we deliver through that function is one of the most paramount importance in the city. And so we want to make sure we get it right. So we've been working collectively among all the departments to make sure that we're not missing a thing. But certainly the hire of the supervisor is the first step to a fully civilianized dispatch function.
Okay, thank you. Members of the subcommittee, any follow-up? If not, councilors, any questions for Chief O'Connor? Yes, Chief Rand, Councilor Rand.
Just more of a promotion.
Yeah, that was really easy. I don't think I'm ready yet, though. Chief of what, I guess, is the question. And mine's more just a comment. Thank you for your thorough
explanation and presentation on your budget and all the changes. And I also just wanted to take a moment to say that I had the opportunity last fall at Harbor Fest to meet some of your dive team. And I think as a community, we don't often think about how there are so many complicated and interesting things about what you do as a fire department, including go out onto the water, and, that kind of connects to our conversation about the harbor master. But just wanted to share publicly that it was awesome talking to some of your dive team members and hearing about their equipment and what they do when they go out on a call.
The dive team is certainly something that the city should be very, very proud of. The city, because let's face it, the city supports us, has supported that dive team for more than 23 or almost 25 years now, and it was born, unfortunately, out of tragedy. I had the opportunity to work on that dive team for 19 years, and we did some pretty interesting calls. And I can tell you that, my own personal experience it's something that you're giving something back to a family that they otherwise might not have. It's quite an experience, unfortunately. But you can't say enough about it, and I definitely appreciate the fact that they've been supported for as long as they have. It's quite the unique challenge.
Agreed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Chief O'Connor? Yes. Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. And just a quick one, because all the questions I had written down in advance were answered in this presentation. So thank you for that. And I think it's great to see the connection between the service you're able to provide, the people who provide that service, and the specific budget lines that maps to. So my only question was sort of teeing up a future conversation about capital expenditures, and just curious, with some potential investments, and we have a public hearing coming up about putting funds towards the central fire station, but with any investments there, are there things that you think that will impact in the operating budget, either reducing some costs that you're now incurring or addressing things like, I know we've talked about having facilities that can accommodate female firefighters as well, just changes to operations that you might expect in future years if some of that investment's made?
I appreciate that question. There's a lot going on right now that I'm also super excited and very appreciative of, and I was very happy to hear that there was going to be the public hearing for transferring some money over. This first initial, and Commissioner Collins is probably better to speak to it than I am, is going to be about the envelope of the building, which will absolutely change. If anybody's ever been in my office, you can tell in the wintertime, the windows don't stop anything. In the summertime, the windows don't stop anything. I pretty much have to keep my blinds down year-round to keep me from being 140 degrees in there or 20 below zero. So it will definitely have an impact on some of those lines. I'm going to look at the West Street station this year, and some of the lines that I have in my current budget to see if we can't do something about the heat down there. But yeah, I do believe, Council, that they will absolutely have an impact on our budget coming up. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief O'Connor.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Foster, I'm sorry, I did not see you over there, so I lost track of the fact that you were here. So if you would join us at the podium. Emergency management is located at page 66 in our budget book. Good evening. Good evening. For some of the newer counselors, they may not be entirely familiar with what you and your department and your volunteers do, as Paul Gauncey would say up in Fosterville. Maybe you could give a thumbnail sketch of your department.
I'm the Emergency Management Director, and I've had a crew of volunteers from the city for almost 40 years now who've worked mainly in the city, doing things for the city. We have about 35 years ago, we started concentrating on EMS. We have an ambulance, and we do ambulance work for the city. If you have a parade or an event or something like that, they'll come out in your ambulance. They'll help with first aid, and they'll take people if they're injured to the hospital they have to, or they'll treat them at the scene. About 25 years ago, I had the opportunity to participate in a, I guess it was a federal grant to put a search and rescue team together, because at the time, we had a lot of our paramedics wanted, or at the time EMTs wanted to do a little more. It's always never enough money. So I watched, and FEMA it was after the Loma Prieta earthquake, and they said they were looking for 25 search and rescue teams around the country to participate in this grant program. And at the time, 25 years ago, all of the emergency management agencies like myself used to work on the North Shore. We had a North Shore Civil Defense Council we used to do. So we all got together and we said, well let's pool our resources. We applied for a grant. And lo and behold, we got the grant. And the grant was to form an 80-person team made up of volunteers, or essentially volunteers because we couldn't pay them. And we bought the equipment and we decided to train them up. And it became a kind of a, pretty soon the tail was wagging the dog, as they say. We had a 80-person team, and we had our team of volunteers. So we called that the Massachusetts Task Force. And we're this Massachusetts Task Force is is sponsored by the City of Beverly, the Emergency Management Agency. And I think the first thing we went to was the Olympics in Atlantic City. Olympics were in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a county just outside of Atlanta we went to down there. And after that, there was, just after that occurred, there was the Oklahoma City bombing. And then we went from a search and rescue team to being a search and rescue team going to major terrorist events. So we took on a terrorist event a little bit. And we did a lot of hurricanes at the time. And then, of course, the World Trade Center happened. We were the first federal team to go to the World Trade Center on 9/11. And as somebody said, then after 9/11 happened, everybody was writing checks. You just couldn't believe the amount of money that was flowing at the time. We took that advantage of that. We built our little compound up there at the time. And, of course, the money dried up a little after that. And we've kept on it for quite a while. And after the 9/11, there was Hurricane Katrina. We went down to Hurricane Katrina. There was Hurricane Sandy and a bunch of little hurricanes in between. And about every 5 years, we get a big hurricane. And we went to Puerto Rico 5 years ago, and we've done a lot since then. So the budget you see is what form is to run the administrative office. Myself and I have a couple of people who work with me, and to do the Beverly's part, which is the volunteers in the town to work and run the ambulance. They also have another truck, a squad truck that also goes with the ambulance. They go to events. You'll see them at the Wild Side event. It'll be on 4th of July. They'll be at the fireworks in the farms. It'll be that sort of event like that. Pays for their uniforms, their training, and it keeps the ambulance running. The most of the federal stuff is paid by a grant. I think you okay this year a grant for about $1 million to pick up the Massachusetts Task Force Urban Search and Rescue part. We also have a third part, which is called the NERAC cash. NERAC stands for Northeast Regional Advisory Council. It's money that comes through Homeland Security for regional type activities. We have a cache of equipment that we store up at our place. And if you need barricades or sandbags or lights or light towers and stuff, we supply those. And that's self-supporting. It's paid for by NERAC. And that's another third function of what we do up there. And so if there's a big light tower or some sort of signboard and it says NERAC on the side, usually says return this to the Massachusetts Task Force cash when you're through with it. So those are three different forms of the operation we do. NERAC cash is funded from out the city. It's funded externally. And the kind of budget you see here is meant to maintain the site we have there and the program we run for the city.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Sorry I had to go on and on, but.
Yeah, no, that's.
If I knew that, I could have brought a.
There's a lot to sort of capture in what your, what your task force does.
Yes.
And I think many people, if not most people in Beverly, aren't really aware of the incredible resources that you have to offer and the kind of response that you have sort of organized with your, the various volunteer teams up there. So thank you very much for your,
Oh, it's
for
all
your
right.
service in that
Thank
way.
you.
Members of the subcommittee, any questions for Mr. Foster?
No, I have no questions, thank you.
Okay. Counselor Feldman?
I don't have any questions, but just to comment that I was incredibly appreciative as a counselor, especially a new counselor during the pandemic, for your updates and keeping all of us informed in terms of the services that you're providing. And I know that in building on that, I learned a lot about what your department does and the resources you have. And I'm so impressed and proud to have you in our community and right in Ward 5 also. And I'm grateful for your work and the dedication of your
Thank you very
team,
much.
because it's really, you do a really impressive work, and we have a lot to be proud for there. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that. I had some dealings during COVID with sort of helping to generate support for homeless shelters for homeless people. And I know that in very quick turnaround, you were able, with your resources and your volunteer staff, able to help out getting the Salem High School ready to accept folks who had tested positive for COVID. So just another example of that Councilor Feldman is referring to. I did terrific work. He had I remember seeing a trailer over there that came equipped soup to nuts with an enormous set of supplies of things that would be necessary to set that up. So again, second what Councilor Feldman said. Anyone else over here? Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. Similarly, I don't have any questions on the numbers. Just wanted to say a thank you and just to ask how things are looking with the volunteers. I know there was some recruitment going on recently, and just want to extend my thanks to the people who go through extensive training and make themselves available should they be needed in a crisis of any of these various forms. And so just curious if you could say a little bit about who's doing that now, if you need more folks, how we can also help spread the word.
Is that a question or?
It was both a thank you and what's the current status of that volunteer crew?
So anytime you want, anyone who wants to join, you just call us. We'll find a place. Usually the entry point is at our emergency management team. You can take somebody in at kind of any level, and they'll train them up, and then from there, after they get a kind of feel for what they'd like, we can move them around from there. We also have we usually have 2 interns all the time from either Gordon College or Endicott College. The Endicott College has a emergency management program, and so they're also in there working for us at no cost to the city.
Thank you very much. I know Councilor Rotunda is very anxious to start training up and volunteering.
I'm working at it.
If there are no more questions or comments, thank you very much
thank
again
you.
for being here this evening and answering our questions.
All right, thank you very much.
Good evening. Chief LaLasher. Good evening, Chief. The police budget is located at page 53.
So good evening. It's actually nice to be in front of everyone this year instead of in Zoom. I want to thank the council for all the work they do for the department. And again, I want to thank my officers for the work they've done last year, especially as we struggled through COVID the last couple of years. And my office is working 24/7, the men and women. We had a very high rate of positive tests with COVID because of the response we have to crashes and medicals and daily calls. So it's quite a burden put on the department, but they did a tremendous job.
Unless you'd like to say a few words, we could jump straight into budget questions.
Well, we can go right ahead. I have a tradition of always having the last spot before a playoff game. It's like 3 times in a row between the Bruins, so here we are.
Councilor St. Hilaire, any questions?
No, and I would just echo your comments, Chief. I think your department has gone above and beyond the call of duty, so to speak, and really appreciate all that they do. And I guess just similar, concern with the fire department, just related to growth of the city, increased calls. I don't know what your trends are looking like in terms of number of calls or types of calls, but for us, as we think about budget and growth of the city and development, for me, it's critical that we maintain our public safety and law enforcement. So just, I guess, a quick comment on that. How are you responding to that? How are you seeing trends related to growth?
So, yeah, Council, thank you. Our calls for service are up as they are every year. I think we're about 25,000. I can get you an exact number, but and again, we've had an increase in population. We have the building downtown. We have the building up on Sawyer. The tremendous business growth between, Dunham Road and also, Cherry Hill. So, the city is constantly expanding, which puts more draw on our services, whether it's alarm calls, car accidents, medicals, other crimes that may occur. People are back out and about, so the restaurants are busy, the bars are busy, the late night crews have been busy, and we had a really bad accident the other night on Hull Street, so it's constant that we're working, and obviously there's new increases. One of the issues that's really complicated the way we do business is police reform. The unfunded mandate that came down forced us to lose the ability to use our reserve officers. We have to now send officers to the full-time academy before they can work the streets. We were lucky, very lucky recently, where 2 of our reserve officers self-sponsored, so they're going to be graduating from the academy in Haverhill this month. They went there basically without a salary. We paid for their entrance fees, uniforms, and things like that, but they went there on their own without being paid a salary. With the increase now in manpower, depending on where our reserves sit, we do have 2 reserves that are ahead of them on the civil service list, but eventually when they get hired, we're not going to have to send them away for 22 weeks. And obviously, like every other department, we're anticipating retirement. So it is a drag on the budget, and it is an increase to the budget because of the way that the law did change.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. Appreciate it.
President Flowers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Chief. My first question was just in your history of presenting before a playoff game, do you feel like the teams have won? Has it been good luck?
We don't have a good record, so I'm hoping for a turn tonight.
This will probably be a turnaround,
yes,
I think.
Absolutely. Hoping for the best.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'll echo the thanks to you and your team. And similar to what I said about the fire department and my day job's proximity to downtown and some of the calls we've made, I've had occasion to work closely, especially with your community impact unit. And I just want to mention, I think that unit is doing really just important community building work and service work that I'm not sure everybody in Beverly is aware of, but thank you to that team as well. I did have a question on page 55, item 51581. I've heard you talk a bit about this is a training item, and I've heard you talk in the past about training that your officers go through. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what types of training might be encompassed for the coming fiscal year, and along with that, what kind of impact you've seen with the new facility. I know one of the things that you had talked to us about was the ability, hopefully, to have more in-house training, and maybe even to bring other departments to Beverly for training. So I wondered if you could just talk about what you see on the horizon for training and how the new station has impacted that.
Thank you, Madam President. So going back to the beginning with the community impact, one of the hopes we have with the increase in manpower is to add to that unit. I'd like to take an officer and dedicate him to work with Ms. Baez with domestic violence, community impact, but a focus with the domestic violence coordinator to help with that mission. And also just the other types of calls for service that they handle. Officer Abrahamson today worked pretty much all day with a woman who's been hit with homelessness and has 3 children. So we've been working with that all day, and those are the type of cases that they work. As far as training goes, we have certain minimum mandatory training that we have to do through the Massachusetts Police Training Council. So there's 40 hours of training set by the council, and it changes every year. It comes out in July of every year, so we don't even know yet what we're going to have. There's always a focus on mental health training, dealing with, like last year was dealing with mass crowds, police bias, or fair and impartial policing, anti-bias training, mental health training has been a focus over the last few years. We're anticipating when we get the notice of what's going to come up this year that there'll be different segments of that involved. Again, de-escalation training. And there's also other topics to come. There's legal updates, which is a minimum mandatory. On top of that, any type of police equipment that we use, those officers have to be certified specifically with that equipment. The different firearms we use, the taser, defensive tactics, that's also something that officers have to have that training to maintain there's a certification process. So those are minimum mandatory trainings that we have to do. Every officer has to have that training. And specifically like this year, under police reform, again, under the Post Commission, any officer with the alphabetical letters between A and H, I have to sign an attestation by June 15th that they have completed all their training, that they're of good character, and then they'll be recertified. And it's continuously now a 3-year process for recertification. So if they haven't done that training and things like that, they will become decertified, or they wouldn't have a certification until they go in front of the council and explain why. So these are all the new things that have come on top of the things we've always had to do. Also, one of the things in the new station, again, some of you haven't had a chance to come in since we've been totally completed, is the new simulator that we have. We received grants from the state totaling about $300,000. The simulator cost, I believe, $206,000. It was first estimated at $284,000. I was able to get it at $206,000. That is for active shooter training, de-escalation training, scenario training. Also, you can do regular skills training with it. So having the officers the ability to go in there and train there is another cost. Because again, we're basically always at minimum staff. If I want to put 6 officers on the street to cover the beats, if we're doing other types of training, it has to be done in overtime. Because we've always talked about it, the worst case scenario is not have a part of the city covered. There's a medical emergency, 2 o'clock in the morning when a child is choking, the police officer is going to be the first one there, because we are out and patrolling the streets. If that area of the city is not protected and an officer has to come from another sector, it could be another 2 or 3 minutes. So that's the importance of making sure that we have officers on the street all the time.
Thank you very much. And just not a question, but a comment. Thank you for mentioning Ms. Baez. And I just wanted to also mention, I every time I interact with her or come to her presentations when it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I'm struck by how fortunate we are to have her working with you and your team and in our city. So thank you for mentioning her. I should have highlighted that too.
Well, and also Ms. McCarroll, who's our jail diversion coordinator, we've also continued that grant through the state, and she'll stay on working for the department in that capacity, doing mental health response training and different. We actually have a meeting tomorrow on officer mental health training, the CIT training, the critical incident training. And another question you asked that I forgot to answer was, we have been holding ongoing trainings at the new station. We had the state in last week doing what's called CopLink. It's a different intelligence program training. The fire departments use the building. We've had other state agencies come in and train. So it's something that we're trying to use that facility and have much more training locally. And it was nice to have the state come in, EOPS came in and train, because I was able to get more of my officers through that training because it was in our building.
Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Yeah, Chief, I just have a question mostly about patrol coverage. The budget calls for 3 additional patrolmen over the previous fiscal year's budget, and I know we're talking about the dispatch, the evolution of the dispatch transition, which should also free up additional resources. How is that likely to affect overtime in your overtime budget? I know we're talking about having a transfer of free cash to address that this year. do you believe that with these additional changes, you should be able to avoid future requests for overtime?
That's the hope. I mean, obviously, COVID affected us this year, and currently, like, we have 3 vacancies that were filled because of retirements. I had an officer retire in July of last year. I could not fill that position because academies were closed because of COVID, and we couldn't use reserve officers. So we ran at a cost this year that we've never run into before. Right now, there's 5 officers in the academy that are going to be graduating. With full-time civilian dispatchers, a 24-hour position is basically we call 4.5 full-time employees. So it's basically an officer per shift that will get back on the street once those positions are filled.
Okay.
And again, that comes down to what do we do with those positions? You know, I'm looking at grants for additional school resource officers, you know, or do we take one of those positions and make an additional school resource officer? Those are things we'll have to look at once everything's lined up.
Okay, thank you. And I just had, I guess it's more of a comment. I was struck by the additional cost of the new building, which is fantastic and much larger. You know, janitorial budget jumping from $50,000 to $126,000. Miscellaneous services, other expenses jumping from $3,500 up to $103,000. And I was heartened to hear from the mayor that the solar, the coming solar arrays will help sort of offset some of these costs. How much of a, well, I guess I don't really have a question so much as a comment that along with all the additional resources that the new facility provides are additional costs that are really sort of, to a degree, unavoidable.
And there's multiple factors based on that. So when we were here at 191 Cabot, our cleaning was done by the City Hall contract. So there was never anything in our budget for cleaning. Now that we're a standalone building, we have to have a separate individual in there. And again, with a 24/7 operation, unfortunately, 2 o'clock in the morning when someone gets sick in a car, somebody has to, that car can go out of service, somebody has to take care of it the next day. We'll have staff now that can do, not have to hire a company to come in and do it, which we used to do, and that's where those other funds came from. We didn't have an electrical budget because we were under the City Hall budget. So these are the things that have changed. And again, once we get to a point where solar is in and we're heading towards that net zero, that's going to make a tremendous impact on the cost to run the building.
Thank you. Questions from, yes, Councilor Rotundo.
One comment and 2 questions. So the first comment is great to see that you're going to be budgeted for 54 patrolmen, which you know since the day I came on. That's what I've been asking for. I know you've been advocating as well, so I'm grateful to see that. One question is with the FLSA. I see a big jump in that. Is there a reason why that's jumping considerably?
That's what page?
I'm sorry, page 54, it's line 51325, my apologies.
A lot of it has to do with the calculation based on the amount of overtime and details and other work that's done. We've had a tremendous amount of construction in the city, which affects the FLS. Mr. Ailes can speak to it, better than that, but there's so much work that there's extra funds that have to come in to cover some of those costs. If it's overtime, if it's a city project, there's certain monies that have to go back into the employees because of the federal law. Right. So Mr. Ailes, when he writes the budget, we sit down and do that, we have to look at what the costs were last year and what the anticipated costs are going to be for the fiscal year upcoming. I don't know if you want to address anything more on that.
This particular cost gets calculated a year in arrears. So I'm actually, as we speak, I've got it going in my office to calculate it for all of FY22. You can see, though, based on the 21 actuals, that it was up around $95,000 in FY21. It fluctuates from year to year, depending upon everything the chief just said. So the $50,000 range that we've got budgeted here, $53,000, is a level funding from what last year was budgeted at originally. and tends to be kind of the middle of the road. So some years we go over, some years, like this past year of FY '22, which was actually a catch-up from FY '21, was a bit under that amount. And so it ebbs and flows, and the chief and I work out kind of where to balance it within his existing budget if there's a need to go over it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Just one other question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Harbor Master, I'm going to come back to that now that you're in front of us and not the mayor. So what's your thought in going with the civilian? And, what's the process? Were you part of that process, and did you have input?
I was not involved in the hiring process.
Okay.
Again, this is a decision made by the mayor runs the city, so I mean, I.
So doesn't the city charter call for the chief to do the appointment?
I think legal affairs might be best.
Okay.
Best.
I believe the mayor and I will speak, and then it goes from myself to the mayor to the council.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other councilors, questions for the chief? Yes, Councilor Bowen?
Thank you. Most of my questions have already been asked, and also would echo the thanks, especially during all of the impacts of COVID. So I want to recognize that work. Just wanted so on the sort of overtime and staffing questions, with some big shifts coming in terms of staff availability, also curious for the year ahead, how you're thinking about increase even more road work and construction, potentially the National Grid project could be running through the city, the roads and sidewalks funds that we are all excited about. So just curious how you're thinking about staffing with some major work.
So a vast majority of that work is paid by contractors. It's not by the city. And actually, we get 10% back from the contractors. It goes back into the general fund. But it does become a stretch on individuals to have to cover shift work, overtime, and also to take care of the public safety needs to keep the roads open and moving. So, I mean, again, when we have officers on the street at details, you have a police officer on the street, even though the city's not paying for it, say, and they're constantly responding to, burglaries, robberies, medicals, so they're out there, responding to those type of incidents. But what ends up happening are times too, when a contractor may want 3 officers, they get 1, or they may not get 1, or we have to take somebody off another job and move them to that position. And this is something, when I go to the chiefs meetings, this is not a Beverly issue, this is a state issue. Every day, we call every single surrounding town looking for extra help. We call the colleges, and those surrounding towns are calling us at the same time. It just, and also, I don't want to say this because I'm in my 40th year of doing this. The work ethic is different, I think, a little bit, where we work compared to, I apologize, my medicine alarm, part of getting old again. So, the younger officers like their time, and so, which is smart because it's a stress reliever. Maybe we were wrong by working, and so I want my officers to take their time off too. They have to have their time off because they have to be rested, they have to mentally be rested and ready to go. So there's a very difficult balance there.
Councilors, any other questions? Hearing none. Chief, thank you so much, you and your department, for your service, and thank you for coming in this evening. It's a pleasure to see you in person.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
I just have one question. Mr. Perry, do you have anything that you in particular would like to comment on from what we've either heard this evening or to date, or what we have coming up this Wednesday with the superintendent and Mr. Collins, Commissioner Collins?
Not really, Mr. Chairman.
And if you don't, that's fine.
No, I'll be briefer than you are. I have nothing to add. No, I think your hearings are going well. I think you're asking great questions, and we look forward to Wednesday's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your brevity.
Go Celtics.
Oh, Councilor Rotundo.
I just need to make a brief announcement, not for you, Mr. Perry, but tomorrow night at City Hall at 6 o'clock, the Community Impact Unit will be hosting a anti-bullying presentation for students in the Beverly School System that did some art. It's being hung, it's hung right now in the lobby, so you're all invited, and I was asked to reach out to the councilors, but as well as the community is to be viewing these tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know if that's going to be on BevCam or?
I don't think it's on BevCam, I think it's just in the, is it on BevCam?
We're waiting on it for the wall tomorrow night.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just downstairs in the first floor in the corridor where they hang the pictures.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hearing and seeing no other questions, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn Committee of the Whole.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. And a motion to adjourn Finance and Property.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.